Okay, Ms. George, well, thank you for being here today. So as you know, we're going to do your pre-conference for your T-test observation. You are going to be a level 1, as I will be your observer as well. Of course, Ms. Blandon will be your observer as well, but I'm going to do one as well. So we're just going to kind of talk about your classroom, what you're expected, what your lessons are going to look like, and kind of what's going to be happening in your classroom. So what objectives will be addressed in the lesson?
Students will be able to track a fiction character over time. So they should be able to track the character the traits, the changes that they undergo based on their interactions with other characters. They're also going to be attacking the ELPs by communicating with their peers, as well as doing some independent reflecting. And you'll see some students also doing video reflections on their books if they get to a point where they feel like something interesting or surprising is going on with their character.
Okay, so the objective is mainly going to be for character traits. Is this part of your, I know this year we've initiated the SLOW goals. Is this part of your SLOW, or is this just something that y'all are working on in class? What is it specifically?
It's not necessarily just character traits. It's the changes that the character undergoes. And yes, it is tied to the SLOW. We're still in the center. We're like closing out a fiction unit. So I'm going to be like doing some stop and checkpoints with some students just to make sure that they're tracking and they understand these skills as this is coming to the end of the unit. Just reteaching any aspects or strategies that they might need to help them identify those things with their characters, like what kind of things affect character changes. So yes, it is in direct relation to my SLOW.
Awesome. Okay. So what are the prerequisite skills that the students need to know in order to be successful in this lesson?
They have to know who the main character is in the story. They also have to understand character traits, how the character is at the beginning of the story, and that characters do change. They have to be able to understand the difference between internal and external traits of a character. So get to know their character really, really well by analyzing them. Know how to compare their character from the beginning and end, so comparing and contrasting.
Right.
I think that'll be it.
Okay. Are there any particular grouping structures you have in place? And if so, how will you hold your students accountable for group work? So will it be mainly independent? Will it be group work? Will it be stations? How will the lesson look?
We don't really function in groups when it comes to group work. It's more so like students have the ability to gravitate towards who can best help them at any given time. So there are some students that might be reading the same text, so they'll work together on certain things, but when it's time for them to do the independent work piece or the partner work piece, they might go to someone that is a more skilled in technology and talk with them about how they can make their submission a little more appropriate or meet the rubric expectation. During their partner talk, it would be with someone, of course, that is reading their same book, and they chose their books on their own, so they grouped themselves in essence. Mm-hmm. I would, for my conferring when I meet with the group, I pull kids that I know need help with like particular skills. Okay. Like skill development. So they could have 4 different books based on their choice, but the skill that I'm working on would be what would tie them together at my table.
Right. Makes sense. If you were going to do group work, would you hold them accountable just for independent work or as a group in general?
Both.
Okay.
So based on their contribution to the group project, and they do peer editing based on a rubric. Okay. Because we did have some students that had reservations about working with other students based on their quality of work and the amount of effort that they give. So one of the accountability pieces that we were able to implement based on student suggestion was a rubric where they could grade their group mates based on their behavior and also the value of the content. Was it something new that they actually learned and contributed, or did they still have to go out and find more information or on the character or whatever the case may be. And then after they've completed those rubrics, I take them into account when giving students group grades. So is the assignment completed? And how well did they participate with their group?
Good. And what are your plans for lesson closure and reflection? Will they do an exit ticket? Will they do a reflection writing? How will you do that? Because I know this is RELA, and so you'll be doing it with fiction, like you said, with character traits and changes over time. But how will you end it and close it?
So because we're reading the book over time, we always do like a little piece to like figure out where we're at and what part of the book we're at with our what part of the plot we're in with our character, based on where we are. And like I said earlier, this is an ongoing activity, so students have a task list of things that they have to do in regards to their book. And one of the tasks that a lot of them are focusing on right now is doing a video reflection, like making a video response to what their character's doing. Some students are also adding to a Padlet based on where they're at in their story, answering a question that's posed. So there's a number of tasks that they have to complete off of a task list. As long as they do one of those at the end of each time that we have a lesson or they have the reading time, then that would be what the exit ticket would be considered.
So what do you expect your students to be able to know to be able to do after the lesson?
Just track a character over time, to be able to make inferences about characters, to understand theme, and how when we read about fiction characters and we track them over time, that those kinds of things also can be related to real life. We change over time, and it's based on the events that happen in our lives. And
making those real life connections.
Right. And making predictions, like based on a number of stories that I've read that have similar characters or similar situations, we can predict this, making inferences based on a lot of the situations in our schema that we might have had. So just being able to use the information from the fiction stories, because most of them are reading realistic fiction, and understanding how those themes and guiding principles can be applied to real life.
So I know I've been in your classroom, and I know you have a very interesting and diverse group of students, but can you briefly describe your varied learning needs of students in this class, including those with disabilities, ELLs, and how you plan to prepare them?
I have a very interesting group.
Right.
So I do have I'm working with about 5 or 6 different small groups. I do have about 6 ELL students, of which 2 of them need to function all of their lessons in a small group setting after direct instruction. I do see them, this particular group, probably 3 to 4 times a week. It may not be for a long time, but I know if I give a meatier, more language or vocabulary intense lesson, that I need to pull them aside and make sure that they understand what the expectation is. So you may see that depending on where we're at in the books that we're reading, what vocabulary we come across. I do have students that are reading beyond grade level and can make deeper connections in their books and can think deeper with their characters, and those kids work on extension work, so they would love to keep reading and finish and not have to stop and be a part of the conversation just simply because that's how they are. So we give them extension work, and we do also let them help other students come up with different conjectures that are beyond just the basic understandings of the book, and what we call it's not necessarily a literature circle, but they get to go talk with other kids about the books and the things that are going on. So they set up like a little coffee shop. Cool. And they can go talk. You'll see once they're working, I usually pull 2 in the time, depending on how well they're on task and how many redirections I have to give. You'll see that I'll work with a small group, and we'll usually work on a specific skill outside of the book that they're reading. Sometimes it'll be vocabulary driven. Sometimes it's just breaking down words. It'll be word parts. Sometimes it can be like how we read. Like I'm still working on fluency with some kids.
So supporting where they are based on your data and things that we've done in the school year. Makes sense.
And those lessons are not directly related to the book that they're reading.
Okay. Very good. How will you assess whether or not students have met the objectives or lesson? So are you going to do, at the end of the book, are you going to do kind of like a formal test, evaluation? How will you assess their learning? Or through conversations, kind of like you've mentioned in small
groups? A lot of
it
is like conversation, but at the end, they'll get to choose if they want to create like a reflective project, not anything that's take home, but if they wanted to advocate for one of the characters in their book that was mean at the beginning and they called him a bully and had a life-changing event and went through a whole series of things, they could make posters, bring awareness to certain things, not exactly project-based learning, but something that's a little bit more free range to where so long as they were able to identify what the skill was and include that in their project, that's what it is. As long as they were able to identify, did their character change over time? What events affected that? How did that character interact with other characters in the story? What growth might have happened and what they took from that and can apply to their real life and can present that in a way. It could even just be like a speech if they wanted. It could be a reflection because everybody's level of comfort is different. But that is something that I do expect for them to do once they've completed reading their text.
Awesome. So are there any other special circumstances that I should be aware of? I know we have a diverse class, but anything special?
Yes. I do have 3 students that will frequently be off task and not participating in the group that I'm fully aware of. But one of the students will be obstinate and refuse to work. He just needs time to transition. So I usually give him the instructions a few times and ignore him a bit until he decides he's ready to be on task. And then he'll come and ask or turn on a light switch to ask me what he's supposed to be doing. And you'll see that I'll probably tell him to go ask someone that is reading the same book that he's reading. He may or may not get upset. This is something that happens all the time. It's habitual. He may or may not get upset and say he doesn't know what to do, where I will have to stop what I'm doing to make sure that I get him on task. I have another student that avoids working because he's not reading anywhere near grade level, so having those conversations about a text that he's been unable to read is a little bit difficult. We are working on him sitting side by side with a partner so that he can hear the story read out loud. He's still not exactly comfortable because it is different than what all the other kids are doing. So you'll see him. He wears a hood and he'll sit by himself until I call his attention and ask him to go on task. And then I have another student who has in-class support at this time and oftentimes is playing and off task and will either entice or will be enticed by a 4th student who is easily distracted but will be on task at any time. You'll see lots of really good helping. I have a lot of really good helping students, but for those 4 particular students, a lot of my time and attention goes to them just to make sure that we're functioning well before I can actually sit down at my table to make sure that I can see my groups, because otherwise I wouldn't get any valuable lessons. That's why I said sometimes I'll see 1 or 2 groups. It just depends on how long it takes for me to get them in a good working speed.
Okay. So I know you mentioned that you're finishing up the fiction unit. So is this going to be, how long until you're expected to be finished with this whole unit?
We're closing the unit at the end of the semester. So I guess the latest would be the Monday before Christmas break. We're hoping for the Friday before. But it's just a culmination of all the things that we've learned about fiction. Okay. So mostly tying everything together, like I said, loose ends, making sure that they've mastered all the skills that they need to master. One of the things that I didn't mention is that there are question stems that they'll see on STAR that are directly related to this particular TEK and the things that we've learned about fiction. So I like to let them create a question using the STEM and come up with the answer choices for the books that they're reading in relationship to their characters, because if you can do it in reverse, then you can create the answers, then you can create the wrong answers, then you probably have really good comprehension. That is also one of the quick assessments that I do. I don't know that you'll see that on that day. It just depends on where the kids are in their books. But we keep a box of those questions, and then at the end for each book, they'll go and that'll be their assessment.
Okay. Good. I know you mentioned how you differentiate within your groups. Is there anything else you want to add for your differentiation for your varied learning styles, since you have a unique class, so to say?
We do have flexible seating, so they get to choose their own workspaces. the way we ask for help is a little bit different. We don't necessarily ask the teacher, and it's not also the ask three before me. They're not fully reliant on each other. There's a lot of freedom for them to meet their own needs. They're able to use whatever resources they need. You might see a student reading a book and then go and getting a Chromebook as needed, simply because they've been taught how to help themselves, which I feel like is differentiating instruction based on their need, not necessarily saying this group is what needs this at this time, because that's not always the case. So you might see that. Yeah.
Okay, good. Is there anything in the observation that I should see anything else that you want to discuss? Because I'm looking at your lesson plans here and everything looks great. So for the planning, will definitely, looks like you'll be hitting there. Your reinforcement and your refinement. I know when we talked in your goals meeting, your reinforcement was that you were going to continue your differentiation since you seem to excel in that, and your refinement was to include technology. Will we be seeing technology during this observation?
The students will be working with technology.
Okay.
But this is after, of course, we've modeled how to properly use it, how to share. When I work with my small groups, I do usually have my laptop up and I'm monitoring, which is also a part of one of my goals, like to make sure that I monitor proper and effective use of in the internet. Monitoring their submissions on Padlet, which you'll probably see projected. They submit their videos via Google Classroom, so I'll get notifications. And then I don't watch videos while I have students. Usually if I get a video while I'm there, once I finish my group, I'll watch it and either give a digital response, but if it's worthy or it's something that I'd like to share out, I ask the student for permission, and you'll see that. As far as reinforcement, there are lots of, even those 4 students, they're motivated, they're self-motivated when they're finally on task. So the reinforcement, I guess they've learned at this point, is just to be personally responsible. The payoff is in, the knowledge that I acquire and, making my teacher proud.
Right. Well, sounds good. Everything looks good in your lesson plans, and I'll be in to see everything. And then we'll check back on your post-conference. Have you been to any professional developments to help with everything with your goals that we set earlier in the year? Have you had any additional practices, or are you seeking it out on your own?
So almost all of the professional developments I've gone to this year have been in regards to technology.
Okay.
So what kind of cool stuff can you use? How to use it, and some of it I have brought into my classroom. Some of it I am excited to bring into my classroom. It's just managing, especially with this group of kids, too many new things. It's just not a good thing for them, and I would rather not overwhelm them or give them too many ways to be distracted. So a few good things is what I decided to add for this year specifically.
Well, good. Well, if there's nothing else, then I will come do your observation, and then we'll have a post-conference and we'll discuss how you think you did, how we rated, and we'll look at your reinforcement and refinement. Do you have any other questions?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ms. George, and I look forward to seeing your class.
All right.